Hi everyone, thank you very much for your patience with the British Rail Network. It's wonderful, really wonderful to see Ike Anya here, and I have such pleasure in welcoming him to this gathering and to Wolfson and to our wonderful Life Writing Centre. This is a debut author, Dr. Ike Anya's first ever public reading from Small by Small, his new book, which is going to be officially published in 2 days' time. So we really have a sneak preview here. The book has been described as a medical memoir unlike any from the West, filled with the color and vibrancy of tempestuous 1990s Nigeria. Those words come from none other than Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, talking about Small by Small. And we're very proud to host this event at the Oxford Centre for Life Writing. Just to say a few words about Ike, to introduce him to you all before handing over to him. Ike Anya is a consultant in public health medicine working in Nigeria and the UK, currently supporting the NHS response to COVID in Scotland. An honorary lecturer in public health at Imperial College, he teaches at Bristol University and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. He is a 2007 TED Global Fellow, and he co-founded Nigeria Health Watch, Epi Africa, TEDx Houston, and the Abuja Literary Society. And it's that last named that I'm particularly interested in exploring later in conversation. He's an advisory council member of the AKO Kane Prize and has published in The Guardian, Huffington Post, Granta, Catapult, and Eclectica, and in an anthology of essays by Nigerian writers of this our country, which we're pleased to have here on our book stand, as well as Small by Small today. He also has an MA in creative nonfiction from UEA, the University of East Anglia. In his very uplifting and pacey memoir, Small by Small, that he's talking about today, he recounts becoming a doctor in 1990s Nigeria. Just to fill you in also on the running order of the event, in a moment I'm going to hand over to Ike. He's going to tell us about the memoir, tell us about the backstory. He's going to read a bit. Then he and I are going to have a bit of conversation about the book. And then we're going to open for discussion. In particular, interested in exploring this idea of the medical memoir in this, our Life Writing Centre. So without further ado, it gives me immense pleasure to hand over to Ike, and thank you so much for being so ready to kind of jump to it. Thank you, Ike. Let's welcome him.
Thank you very much, Elleke. That's very kind and generous, and thank you for embracing the opportunity to do this. It's been a bit uphill pushing this book, and so when people have welcomed it with open arms, I've been even more appreciative. And that also goes to all of you who I'm sure had more interesting things to do on a Tuesday than to be here. So thank you. My book, it still feels strange to use those two words, my book. Was something I wrote the first words in February 2013 in a small village in Ghana, in the hills overlooking Accra, in Aburi. And how I got to that place is a long story, because I was a little boy who grew up in a university town, Nsukka, in southeastern Nigeria. And in the 70s, when I was growing up, it was a vibrant home of art and culture. Our next door neighbor was Chinua Achebe, the famous writer. And, various uncles and aunts were involved in art and music. And I love reading and stories. And so, as you do when you're a young reader, at some point I thought I would start telling my own stories and I would have a book published. Fast forward 20 years later, I finished medical school in Nigeria, and life was so busy and hectic that as a young doctor, I thought this idea of writing is dead and done and dusted. And that continued when I came to the UK in 2001 to do a master's at the London School of Hygiene. I still had lots of friends who were writers. I still, hung around writing events, but I thought, I would never be sort of writing a book. I would be one of those people who would always be, described in, literary memoirs or something as someone who hung around the scene, present friends to this person and friends to that person, but never. And then through an extraordinary sequence of events, I found myself in 2013 having an essay published in Granta magazine. And that was because I had met the then deputy editor, Ella Allfrey, at a book launch for a friend of mine, the late Binyavanga Wainaina, the Kenyan writer, who in some ways is responsible for us being here today because he introduced me to Ella. And Ella, Binyavanga, and I went out to dinner that night. It was the night before his book launch proper. And there we were, this Kenyan man, this Nigerian, and this Zimbabwean, who all loved books fiercely. And we basically got to the restaurant in Chinatown at 7, and we didn't leave till 1 a.m. And when we left, it was a sort of epic night. And she pressed her card into my hand and said, "You must keep in touch." And months later, she got in touch saying, "We're doing a Granta Granta edition themed on medicine, and we're missing some pieces." And I remembered you knew lots of up-and-coming writers, and you were a doctor, so wondered if you knew someone you might recommend. And I said, "Oh, there's this piece I have." And I teased Ella about it because we are friends now. She was distinctly dismissive. She said, "Send it, but send me some names as well." And so I sent this piece, which I won't go into detail because it was actually written for Granta under a previous editor, Jason Cowley. But it didn't get published, and I just kept it. I didn't submit it anywhere else. And somehow Granta came again, and I said to Ella, "I've got this piece," and I sent it to Ella. And lo and behold, my phone starts ringing about 20 minutes later. And I'm in a meeting, and it keeps going and going, and it's Ella. And I'm thinking, Ella knows that I'm at work. Have I attached some confidential document or something by mistake? I ring her back, and she says, we loved it, we want to publish it. So that's how I got a publication in Granta on a platter of gold, without submitting, without going through any process. And that essay is called "People Don't Get Depressed in Nigeria," and it was a snapshot of my time working as a doctor. And what then happened was, when the Achebes moved out next door, a family that moved in were the Adichies. So I've known Chimamanda since she was about five or six. And when the Granta piece was being prepared, she said to me, "This is a really good piece. And when it comes out, you're going to be doing readings and events about this, to mark the publication. When you do, editors and agents are going to approach you to ask, are you working on a book? When they do, you must say yes." And I said, "But I'm not working on a book." She said, "Shut up, just say yes. Even if it's a worm of an idea in your head, that counts as working on a book." And so, as she predicted, and I sometimes think what would have happened if she hadn't said that to me, because I would have said no, and maybe no, But what happened was that by the end of the promotion period, I had about 3 agents and 2 publishers who had expressed interest and were keen to have lunch or something. And by December of that year, 2012, I said to myself, people have written whole manuscripts, several, and they can't get one agent to look at it, or one, and you, on the basis of 3,000 words, have 5 people willing to. You must make something of this opportunity. You will not be forgiven if you don't. And so I thought, my life was very busy then. I was Deputy Director of Public Health for the 3 central London boroughs. And that was just before Andrew Lansley's big reforms in 2013, which upended everything. So we're in the middle of transition. And I thought the only way I can make something of this is to go away and try and write. So before that, one of the publishing houses had asked me to do a proposal. They were willing to consider a proposal. I did one, and they sent it back saying, oh, no, this doesn't cut it. And I was about to start the second one, and I thought, why am I spending this rare time I have trying to describe the book I want to write when I could use the time to actually write the book and they can decide whether they want it or not? So I went back to them and said, I'm not doing a second version of the proposal. And they were surprised because they said, this is very rare. We don't often ask people for proposals. And when we do, they usually, I said, that's fine. I'll go and see what I can do, and then you can decide. So I went away to Ghana, and I went to Ghana, not Nigeria, because of electricity. I had only 6 weeks. My boss, I still don't, well, she says, the only reason she said yes, because I walked in and said, I need 6 weeks unpaid leave. She said, when? I said, January, as soon as possible. I said, but we're moving in April. I said, yes, but I need to do this. And she said yes, because she saw that from the look on my face, that if she had said no, I was as I came into the office, that she knew whatever I was asking, I was ready to resign. And she was right. So I went away to Ghana, and I wrote 100,000 words in 6 weeks, which at the time I didn't think remarkable, but now realize was extraordinary. But I think what it was that having been away from Nigeria for about, at that point, 10 years, I'd had time to reflect on my time as a young doctor, as a medical student. And, these were stories that I'd been telling people in interaction, and they'd found really amusing, fascinating, interesting. And so it was as if all this was unleashed and just came pouring out. I came back with a very rough 100,000 words in February 2013. And then my life imploded because April 1st, 2013 was when public health moved from the NHS into local authorities. We were covering the 3 central London boroughs. We already short one person, so the top team was supposed to be a director and 3 deputies. We were missing 1 deputy, but we thought the 3 of us could cover the 4 to start with. On the eve, my boss got rid of or disappeared or whatever. So basically, on the day, it was 2 people doing 4 jobs, and that continued for 6 months. And my mental health, my physical health, everything went down the drain. I did not open this manuscript for 2 years after that. And then my agent at Wiley, Sarah Chalfont, incredibly wise, because she used reverse psychology on me. All through those 2 years, she would send me an email from time to time. Ike, don't you think it's time we had a coffee, a catch-up? And with all the stress of work, I would be all wound up, and I would say, I'll go for that coffee. And if Sarah dares ask me a word about the book or a manuscript or whatever, I will let her know exactly how awful my life is at the moment. And I would go for these coffees, and Sarah would say not a word about the book. It would be all about, how are you? Are you coping? I'm hearing things, because this was austerity time, and I'm hearing things are really bad. What's it like where you are? So after 2 years of this, I thought, I owe this woman something. She's very busy. And she's giving me all this coffee time. It's not for nothing. And so really that's how, I kind of decided I needed to go back to it. And to do that, I realized I needed space and time. And so I applied to the University of East Anglia. And I said, if they admit me, I'll take it as a sign that this is what I should do. So I was admitted, and so I resigned my job, which some people thought was crazy then, and went to East Anglia, which gave me time to work on some projects in Nigeria that I was working on, and to work on the book. And what that did was, people ask, what did East Anglia do in terms of creative writing? I think it was 2 things. One was being in a community of people who cared about books and reading and words and the beauty of words, both teachers and fellow students. That was pretty special. And the second was having feedback from those people, because what I did was take those 100,000 words that I had from Ghana and feed them into every single assignment, every single essay, every single reading that we had. If they said write about the moon, I would find a passage that related to the moon and send it in. So gradually I had people polish the whole manuscript for me. My dissertation was part of it as well. And I then had something I thought by the end of 2017 when I left UA that I was ready. It took another 3 drafts before my agent thought it was ready to be shown to publishers. And then, after it was sent out, there was silence for a long time, and silence for a long time. I finished during lockdown, October 2020. So there was George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, so I thought, oh, what a wonderful time to have a book out as a black writer. People will be all over it. Nope. So at a point I said to my agent, what's the feedback been like? And she said, well, people are saying doctors' memoirs have been done. They are done. And I said, what? And she said, yes. And my response to them is, tell me when last you read an African, Asian, or Latin American doctor's memoir. But I think that's an interesting aside on, I suppose, the publishing industry and where their mind is at, because it suggests that if an American doctor's written and an English doctor's written, then that genre is done. But, and at a point, I actually said to my agents, I'm taking, I wanted to spare them the embarrassment of saying to me, this isn't working. So I said to them, look, can I have the manuscript back and self-publish it? Because I just want to get this done. And I know you might be thinking it, but you don't know how to say it to me. So I want to give you permission. And, to their credit, they said, nope, we are not anywhere near that stage yet. This book has a home, and we'll find it that home. And when it does, And not long after, I got a message saying Sandstone Press, this small Scottish press, were interested in it. And they had asked if I was willing to work with them on it. And I said yes, provided it was constructive criticism. Because I got to a point where, I didn't study English at graduate level or literature. So it was only when I went to East Anglia that I learned elements of a novel, things like plot, character, setting. I knew nothing about all those technical terms. And so when people said to me vague literary things like, that chapter isn't quite there, I didn't know what to do with that. If you said to me, that bit with the doctor and the pregnant woman, I don't understand why he didn't do this or why she didn't do that, or I don't get enough of her emotion, I can deal with that. But, I was getting a lot of vague and, And so I said, yes, I'm happy to work with them. And, had a really good experience working with them. And, we fought over a few things, like the cover. But they ended up giving me, a gorgeous cover, which I love. It's way beyond anything I expected. And so that's how we got to this. And in terms of what I was trying to do with the book, on one hand, yes, it was about fulfilling that, here's an opportunity, you've got to do something. But I think it was also about talking about what it is like. How do you go from an 18-year-old fresh out of school to 6 years later being the person that says to a young mother, oh, take the baby home, give him 2 spoons of cowpea, he'll be fine. How do you know? How do you become that person? What's the process? And I started reflecting on it for myself, and I couldn't put my finger on where or how it happened. And so I felt the only thing I could do was just tell the story of what I'd done, and perhaps other people would be able to see how, I suppose, the sum of what you learn formally in books, what you see other people doing, what you experience yourself, turns you into that person. So that was one thing. The other thing I also wanted to do was that sometimes, after I moved to the UK, I would get people, and I remember, there was somebody in the publishing industry at the time the Granta piece came out, who I had a meeting with. And one of the things they said to me was, it must have been such a culture shock coming to work in the NHS. And I sort of reeled back and thought, my father did his PhD at Cambridge in 1965, and my parents were married in Cambridge. So, the idea of a culture shock coming to work in the NHS was... So I said, well, some things were the same, and some things were very different. And in some ways, that's partly what I want to do with this book, to explain how medical education and training, in many ways, is the same all over the world, but it's also very different in many other ways. And I think it's important at this time when there's a global shortage of doctors and nurses. No country, I think, is training enough doctors and nurses anywhere near what they need. And most countries are trying to deal with the problem by themselves, making plans. So Britain, we had talk about apprentice doctors and nurses. Different European countries are doing different things. And the reality is it's a demand and supply question. Nobody is growing the pool. They're expanding the pool. And my controversial idea is that we begin to think of the health workforce as a global health workforce. And so we start training together. So instead of Britain, because at the moment, Britain and the US are outsourcing the training of their doctors and nurses to poorer countries without a formal contract. But because doctors and nurses from those countries are ending up working there, that's what it means. So let's make the implicit explicit and say, we will go and set up nursing schools and medical schools in Nigeria, in all these countries. We will train more doctors. Some will stay in Nigeria. Some we will take, as has been our way, but the global pool will increase. There's also the question of why is it that most countries, rich countries, aren't training enough? Because it's expensive to train a doctor and nurse. It's cheaper to train them in Nigeria or in some of the other countries. But the question then arises, why is it more expensive here? Are we overtraining them? Because obviously the quality of nurses from Nigeria and doctors from Nigeria is good enough for Britain to allow people like me to come and work here. So they're not saying my education was substandard. So why is my sort of cheaper education not the norm at a time we don't have resources? I'm not suggesting, but that's a question I think. It's about thinking about the workforce in that sort of way. That's some of the things. So these are some of the if you like, the broader questions. But I don't want people to come to the book with any of that. I just want them to enjoy the story. The story of a young man growing from, an early time and, in a very politically turbulent time, yes, but also with lots of fun, lots of humor, because there was a lot of that, some of the exams we had, and hopefully I'll read a little bit and then you can get a sense of that. So I'm going to start with a student demonstration that happened in my first year in medical school. Towards the end of the first year, as we prepare for our final examinations, food prices shoot up, propelled, everyone says, by the government's structural adjustment program, which has been endorsed by the World Bank. In between lectures, we angrily discuss the rising cost of food, soap, toothpaste, transport. Rumors spread about the wealth that our military leaders are secreting in bank accounts in Switzerland, the mansions they are buying in London, New York, and Paris. In the small canteens where we go for our meals, more and more students ask for smaller portions of food. The common phrase is, "Madam, give me 50 naira rice without." Without is a euphemism. The student cannot afford the small pieces of meat and fish that ordinarily enliven our stodgy starch meals of garri and rice. Pocket money from our parents, who are mostly on fixed salaries, dwindles as the cost of living soars. One night, a rumor spreads. Our militant student union leaders have returned from a national meeting with leaders from other universities. they have resolved to embark on a series of demonstrations to protest the economic policies of SAP. The next morning, we wake to the loud noise of banging on plastic buckets and on the metal railings that run around the walls of our halls of residence. The demonstration is on. Pulling on our oldest clothes, we dash into the corridors, joining the shouting, chanting mass of angry students heading for the center of the campus, where the female student halls of residence and the administrative buildings are. Homemade cardboard placards bearing slogans like "SAP is sapping us" and "IBB must go" are waved high. There is a sense of carnival mingled with outrage, especially for us, since this is our first demonstration. At the female hostels, we run through the corridors, banging on doors, co-opting the residents to join us. Some female students come out to join, others barricade themselves behind closed doors. A group of shouting students head for the lecture theaters to drive out any students there, forcing them to join. So I'll just stop. That's a flavor of that bit. And then something less so this, not long after this happens, there's then the closure of all the universities, and that was something that happened fairly often, because the military leaders knew that if students were on campus, it was easy to organize demonstrations, but if they were sent home, then very little would happen. So I'm going to read this bit. Is from when we're doing obstetrics, and it's a chapter called Infertility, Miracles, and Catching Babies. On a hot afternoon in the wood-paneled, prefabricated physiology theater, we wait for an obstetrics and gynecology lecture. Most lectures in this, our 5th year, are held at the hospital site in the morning before ward rounds or clinics. For some reason, perhaps the professor's convenience, we meet today in the late afternoon on the university campus. The professor, tall, dark-complexioned, in a simple Ankara shirt over trousers, picks a piece of chalk from the lectern, walks over to the blackboard behind him and writes a single word: infertility. He underlines it, then says it out loud, his strong Anambra Igbo accent rendering it infertility. The class titters. He pauses until silence is restored, and with our eager pens poised over our notebooks, he continues. In England and the USA, a couple meet, fall in love, and get married. In the process, they may or may not decide to have children. He pauses for effect. We wonder where he is going. In Africa, he continues, couples marry to have children. In the process, they may or may not fall in love. As the theater erupts with laughter, his face turns stern, serious. Don't laugh, this is the truth. For you as doctors working in Africa, infertility is a very, very important issue. His assertion rings true. We all know women in our families and communities whose marriages have fallen apart under the pressure of trying to have children. There are numerous plays on this theme on television, many novels, many short stories. They tell of the anxious desperation that drives many of these women, even the most accomplished, to dirty side street herbalist shacks, downing unknown disgusting concoctions, or to prophets and prayer houses, seeking a child to secure their marriages, their places in society. And it is the women, always the women, because among our people, it seems, the inability to have children is always the woman's problem. A few days later, we are in a consulting room in the gynecology outpatient clinic. The consultant, dapper, fatherly, like a suave older uncle, wears an elegant dark suit, white shirt, and dark tie. We observe the consultations as he sees each patient. As they leave, he briefly sums up learning points from the case. The last patient comes in, a young woman, about 35 years old. She is plump, well-groomed, in Ankara up and down. Simple gold earrings glitter at her ears, and a slender gold chain encircles her throat. Beaming, she clutches a sheaf of laboratory test reports, wedged against her shiny black leather handbag. Her familiar warm greeting and the bulging tattered file containing her case notes indicate that she is obviously an old patient, a repeat customer. The consultant ushers her in to sit, reviews her lab results, and passes them round to us as he congratulates her. The reports include a positive pregnancy test and a barrage of other general blood tests to assess her health. Everything is within normal limits. The consultant gives her a cursory general examination, then sends her to register for the antenatal clinics. She leaves and he passes her case notes round. A skim read reveals her story. Married 10 years without a child, she first came to her consultant 3 or 4 years ago, having tried a variety of doctors, midwives, herbalists, and prayer houses. About 6 months after her first visit, her husband finally, grudgingly, accompanies her to see her consultant. The consultant has insisted he attend, having found nothing significant in her tests. His sperm count test results are recorded in the folder. The single word, azoospermia, written in capital letters at the end. Unusually, he has had additional tests, including a testicular biopsy. They all indicate that he will never be able to have children. However, there is an old antenatal card stuck at the back of her case notes, and the consultant had asked after her husband and son. The case notes confirm that she successfully delivered a healthy baby boy at her hospital 2 years ago. We are puzzled and look to the consultant for answers. Has she remarried? Had some pioneering treatment? Miracle! This is wonderful, exclaims one of our classmates, a very active member of an evangelical student fellowship. Our consultant smiles wryly, reaches for the woman's case notes, and with care isolates the pages with the husband's results. Ripping them out, he tears them into small pieces, tucks them into his trouser pocket, and addresses us. As obstetricians, you will see many sensitive, delicate, and complex issues. You people will need to think very carefully about the consequences of whatever you choose to do. He describes the woman at her first visit, almost delusional with the trauma of her infertility, and the ecstasy she and her husband displayed when she first got pregnant, and then when she had her first baby. Now a second baby is on the way, making the happy family complete. Perhaps it is indeed a miracle, he concludes. But if it is not, who am I to pour sand in her gari? So I think I'll pause there and maybe.
Would you like to take a,
yes, thank
take
you.
a seat for a moment and we can have some conversation? I was really interested and kind of curious as well to hear you sort of give us the backstory there, Ike, because on the one hand, I mean, having had the pleasure of reading the book, it is a very ordinary story. And then there are these sort of remarkable moments that are very sort of, you know, Nigeria specific also. And to gloss what I've just said, I should say that before I did my literature degree, I went to medical school. I wanted to be a doctor. And I left medical school after 6 months because I wasn't reading enough. I was a big reader, and so although I enjoyed it at one level, I've switched to a literature degree. So that was very much in my mind, but I did have some of this kind of iconic experiences that you're talking about here. So this is on one level a very universal story, as you were saying, and then on another level, it's very, very specific to your own experience.
It's interesting you say you went to medical school for 6 months, because so did Chimamanda and so did Chinua Achebe. So there's a long tradition of...
In fact, Chimamanda and I have had this conversation about going to medical school.
And actually, I will tell this other story, because although we were neighbors and, we knew of each other, but in the university community, it was very, very strictly hierarchical. You were either John's younger brother or, John's big sister. So my younger brother's friends don't know me even now as me. They know me as Nazor's big brother. And, that's how it was. So Chimamanda was younger than me, so not really on my radar. But because she and my younger brother were friends, and he knew we both liked reading and writing, he kept saying, oh, you know, you should have a chat sometime. And I came back from medical school. She was still in secondary school at this point. And he organized an evening where we sort of showed each other what we'd been writing and had this conversation about books we liked. And after she looked at the poems I'd written, which were pretty poor now, but she said, why are you reading medicine? You know, she was 7 years younger than I was. And I said to her, you know, like a lofty big brother with, well, you know, the thing is that in countries like ours, you can't really make a living from writing. You have to have something and then you know, have that on the side. And I tease her that she spent the rest of the years since then proving to me just how wrong I was. But yes, that's just an aside.
But I mean, it is worth, and I know because here at the Life Writing Centre, we have a number of writers working on different life writing projects, and a number of them are coming from history and from literature, so there will be that sort of interest in the room. It is, on one level, the memoir that you've written, a very literary memoir, because you give us stories in a series, but then you also, as part of the background, you tell us about going to the British Council Library and stocking up on Nigerian literature. So I wondered, just as a sort of as an opening question, whether you could tell us a little bit about, I mean, if you have some reflections on that process of, I mean, as in the anecdote you just told about knowing Chimamanda, about shuttling between literary reading and writing and then, you know, the day job as a doctor on the wards, which involves a completely different kind of operation.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because I've always loved books, you know, and I was a very precocious reader. You know, I read Things Fall Apart at 6 and Roots, the African American, I read at 6 as well, the year it came out. And my mother says that it was out of shame hearing me discuss Roots with my father at breakfast, that she thought, if this 6-year-old read it, I better go and read it. And then she did and thought there's lots of inappropriate stuff for a 6-year-old in here. But by then it was too late. So I think it's possible in another country I would have read literature or history. I was always the best student in literature and history in my very competitive boys' school in Lagos. But one of the things that I found that effortless in some ways. There was no debate or struggle. Each time they were handing out essays, whose would be the best? Ike's would be the best, of course. While in physics, chemistry, and biology, it was a constant battle, you know, who would be on top. So that gave me a bit more excitement and interest. And then there was also the fact that our school, it was just assumed that, it's interesting, you know, it was a boarding school that was started by the British, and it was to provide, I'm sure they built it in most countries they were in, to provide, you know, the elites to support the colony. And, you know, so our school song was written by a past eating headmaster, and there was all that sort of thing. But what was good, I think, was this healthy sense of competition, and it wasn't about, you know, how much money or, you know, it was purely on academic merit mostly. And within that, there was a respect both for academic performance and sport, which when I reflect on some of the places I see, you know, it seems not to be the case. So at King's College, the brainiest boy, even if they were no good at sports, you know, was equally revered as the team captain of the football and cricket team. And the assumption was that we were all going to read electronic engineering, medicine, and if you were arts inclined, well, I suppose you'd read law. And that was it. You know, no one said this explicitly, but that's what the years before us did, and the years after, you know, we just kind of fell into it. And so I knew I wouldn't do engineering because I found the physical sciences too abstract, and you know, the life sciences I found still had story. You know, describing the process of digestion is a story. But, you know, and so I think that's why I did that. But I said to people, you know, it's also having the best of both worlds, because I say to my doctor friends, oh, you know, I'm a writer, I'm going to do a reading. And they're all like, wow. And I say to my writer friends, oh, I'm a doctor, I have to go because I'm on call. And they go like, wow. What's not to like there? Even if, you know, if you're not a very good doctor, you're not a very good writer, it's a great combination to have. But on a more serious note, I think, you know, you were saying about how different they are, and I wonder how different they really are, because actually, the observation, you know, to be a good clinician, a good health worker, you need to be able to observe and see your patient, not just what they tell you, but the other hidden signs. And of course, as a writer, it's the same. You know, and I have a keen interest in that sort of thing. I remember a few years ago being on the tube with a friend, traveling, we were going to have brunch in the West End in London, a Nigerian friend. And there was this fascinating scene playing out. A family had got on, you know, they come from obviously outside London in for the day. The mother had asked the father for one of the kids said, I'm hungry. And the mother asked the father for some money, and he said, what about, you know, have they spent the 10 pounds I gave you at the beginning of the morning? And he said, yes, they had this, you know, and it was like the cost of living crisis sort of playing out in real life, and I was fascinated by it. And we got off at Piccadilly Circus, and I said to my friend, wasn't that fascinating, that conversation? He said, what? What conversation? He had missed it all. And that often happens to me, and that's where I think, yes, because both as a doctor and as a writer, yes, I observe that. And I'm nosy, I put my hand on. I also kind of imagine lives for people I see. You know, this person sitting here, where has she come from? What brought her here? Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, as it happens, I have, you know, in student housing, I lived mostly with medics. And what I always found was, by then it was too late to go back to medicine for me, but what I always found was that the medics were the greatest readers. Why? Because of seeing the human in the round. You know, I mean, what you do as a medical doctor is you solicit people's stories. Why are you feeling bad? You know, what's going on in your life? And yeah. So thinking about that give and take between literature and this medical memoir that you've written, and you know your life as a doctor, and you've taken us through these experiences, and small by small, by the way, for those who haven't read the blurb on the back, small by small is it's actually, I mean, I had encountered it before in Flora Nwapa's work.
Right, okay.
So it's the advice given, you know, by an elder to a younger person to say that, you know, achievement comes gradually in small increments. You know, you set out on your life path, not taking great big steps towards your objective or your goal, but going small by small.
Yeah.
You know, one step at a time.
Little by little.
Yeah, little by little. This is what Ike is.
And my grandmother would always say that to me. We're doing, you know, so my maternal grandmother were very close, and partly because I was named after her husband, my grandfather, and so traditionally she would call me her husband as well, and so she was very excited when I got into medical school, because she had had some serious health challenges, and so she would say, each time she came to visit, this exam you're doing now, because I was always preparing for one exam or the other, as you do in medical school, is this the one that's going to make you a doctor? I say, oh, no. Mama, that's still far off. And she would say, well, small by small. And so that's kind of where the title comes from, and I like the idea that it honors her memory as well.
Yeah. That's great. And in the process of writing, for the many life writers in the room and those interested in life writing, was it a clarifying process? I mean, did you come to understand your journey so far in a different light? You know,
Absolutely.
I mean, you kind of couch this story in the wider story of kind of coming to Britain, you know, a few moments ago. But did that then shed light on the 1990s and that story of...
It did, because first of all, I think it was in the process of writing this I started asking, when exactly did I decide to become a doctor? And the answer is I couldn't put my finger. You know, there's a scene I remember which I write about as a 4 or 5 year old playing with a doctor set in the sandpit in a house. But, you know, where did that go to? I will be a doctor. I don't know. So that was interesting to me, realizing that I couldn't, you know, I had never thought about it until I was writing. The other thing that happened, and this was the really scary bit, was a lot of how this happened was because I had these episodes or patients or teachers who were very, very vivid in my memory, or days. So like the day Sani Abacha, the military dictator, seized power in 1994. You know, I can still smell the hostel room I was in. You know, I know I was reading a textbook of pathology. I was reading the lung. You know, and I even remember that falling asleep in the hot sun, you know, and coming to with the radio blaring, because we left our radios on 24/7 in the student halls. And then it was military music. What was going on? You know, it was this period between the elections had been annulled in June 1993 by Babangida, who was then the military head of state, and then, you know, there were lots of debates about what was going to happen next. Would Abiola, who everyone agreed had won the election, would he somehow be allowed to take power? Or would, you know, so it was what they used to call the impasse in Nigeria. And so we were thinking, and the rumor at that point was that Abacha was on the side of the angels, that he was one of the people in the military pushing for power to be handed to the rightfully, you know, the person who had rightfully won. And so it was with a sense of horror that, you know, I thought, oh, he's doing it. You know, he's going to announce that they've dissolved the government and the elections are done. And then slowly he was getting more and more authoritarian, you know, and he dissolved the Senate, he dissolved this, he dissolved that. It became obvious this wasn't what we were expecting. And by the end, he ended with a line, you know, any attempt to test our will be met with decisive force. And, you know, it became obvious what we're into. And going from that hope, dashed like that, you know, it was as if it crystallized all the frustration of the years before. And that was the only completely spontaneous student demonstration I witnessed in my 7 years at university, because as he finished, people just poured out of their rooms, out of the classrooms, out of wherever, shouting, you know, and we just coalesced into this big crowd. Now, the interesting thing is that when I wrote that bit, you know, in Ghana, I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed, you know, I had all those feelings came pouring back, the frustration, the anger, the bitterness. I was tossing and turning. I would go online, Google, you know, June 12, I was looking at pictures. But what worried me most, or what scared me most, was that the day before, if you had asked me, had you been affected by Abacha's taking power, I would have said no. I would have said, yeah, you know, it was something that it was bad, but, you know, we survived it. I had no idea that I still had those deep feelings about it. And, of course, the question then came to me, what else is lurking in there that you don't know about? But you know, it gave me some insights into mental health and, you know, sort of some of the things you don't really pay attention to. So in that way, again, that was, I don't know if it was helpful, but, you know, it opened a new door.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, I was reading this to a small group recently, and I choked up. And for about a minute, I couldn't talk. Again, if you had told me before I did the reading that would have, in fact, that's probably why I chose not to read from that date today, because
I mean, on that, or related to that, this is, I was, you know, really struck by this. It's an incredibly honest memoir. I mean, I don't know for sure, of course, but it gives, because what what Ike Anya does is that he talks about his failures. I mean, you're very open about that, and about the disappointment, and processing the disappointment, and then feeling disaffected because everybody else has passed, and they your classmates also almost don't want to meet your eye because this pediatrics exam just has not gone well. It really is striking, and I think will be inspiring for others reading it, because you push through. You push through. Did you want to say something about that, and then we can
Sure.
open for
I think it sounds trite, but I think what's the point writing a memoir if you're not going to be honest? At least try to be. Of course, we're all protective of ourselves, but I was very conscious of trying to strip away any kind of I'm a hero or and showing the other vulnerable side of myself. So I talk about drinking and going on call and treating patients, and how mortified I was later about it, and some of the misogyny and that attitudes towards women that we had and displayed. I'm open about, because I felt that would be what would make it worth reading. If you're sort of curating this beautiful picture of someone who sails through exams, and what's interesting about that? I don't see that. And I think I was helped by some advice Chimamanda gave me, which I often share, which she said, if you're writing about something you think is difficult, it's painful, controversial, you're not sure will the family be able to, don't censor yourself when writing. Write as if no one's going to ever read it. Just be as completely honest about, if you hate your father, just write it the way you feel it. And then put it away. At least you've got it written down. You can then later look at it, things, you may have had a conversation with your father and get to a point in your relationship where it's fine for you to publish it, or you might get to a time in your life where you think, sod it, whether he likes it or not, I feel strong enough to publish it. But the fact is that you have it there pure and uncensored, and that's when it's strongest. If in the process of writing you start saying, well, I can't tell about the time he slapped me because, you just have to talk about the slap, how it felt, what it felt like to you. I found that incredibly useful in writing this. So I did do some editing afterwards, and the bits I took out, but I think that's what still comes across, that sense of, what's and all. And, I'm very much, the other thing, I'm very much drawn by the, what, if you like, the Leonard Cohen, there's a crack in everything. Everything is flawed. Every human is flawed. I don't believe there are any heroes. So, and at the same time, I also believe there's value in every human. So I'm very drawn to what I call the humane writing, that tries to portray people in their fullness, no matter whether they're high or low, or good or bad,
That's a lovely point to open up to all of you in your fullness. We have Anna there has a roving mic. I also have plenty more questions, so don't feel under pressure. But if you'd like to ask Ike, I'm hearing you say
Ike.
Yes.
The answer is that I answer to both, and I always have from childhood.
Okay. Yeah.
It's complicated by the fact that many people who have not met me instinctively go for Ike, which is the name, but actually, as a child, I was called Ike.
Okay. To rhyme with Nike.
Yes.
Are there questions from the audience? Yes, please.
Okay, Oma. I think, my name is Oo Nwoye, and I've known Ike from Nigeria for a while, and I'm happy the book is out. He has been threatening us
Finally.
He has been promising us on Facebook since 2000 and forever.
Finally.
Yes, so congratulations. I think the question I want to ask, when you talked about Paul Sandy Magari, I don't know how many global authors speak Nigerian, let me put it that way, Nigerian lingua. We grew up knowing how an English book should be, right? And usually we're told to globalize our speak so it will be accepted. So I wanted to know how you were able to navigate that. Did you just write for the Nigerian audience? Did you just say, do you know what, I'm writing it for my future self. If you understand it, you get it. If not.
This is a really good question, because before I wrote this book, I have writer friends, literary friends, and we're very activist about, why should we have glossaries at the back of our books explaining Igbo words? First time I read about bagel, I had to go to the dictionary and find out what a bagel was, because the New York bagel, because I'd never seen one. So anyone who wants to know what Gary is should go and Google and find out. But when the process came to write, of getting published, my editors were strongly of the view that a glossary would be helpful. I, having gone through the process of trying to get published in the first place, I'm keen to support these people who had put their faith behind this book. I thought, this can't be a hill I'll die on. I know there'll be people in my circles who will sort of mark me, forever, out of the circles because I had a glossary. But, I felt this was something I needed to be pragmatic about. But what I also found was, in the process of writing it, that question of who are you writing for, which people would often answer saying, oh, I'm not writing for anyone, I just write. I thought, well, I don't know about other people, but it was very obvious to me, not willingly or willfully, but I was obviously writing for someone because I was putting in descriptions in some places and not in others. So I'm obviously assuming something. So I was describing this, I did an interview with Claudia Hammond at the BBC, which is going out on Wednesday. And I said to her, I suppose I'm writing for a London dinner table audience. So there are some Nigerians there who know what Gary is, and there are people who may never have encountered Gary, and people who are willing to find out, So and in some ways that's true, because this is where these stories came from. It came from me, conversations I had with friends in London, and so it's that sort of couching and framing. But it's, I really do want to revisit that question of I don't know who I'm writing, I just write. Because I think, because each decision to include a word or remove a word, you're either saying people know what this means or they don't.
I mean, there's also, although it's not on the surface of the book at all, it is the story of your training, there is also that political message which you were talking about earlier, about outsourcing medical training, creating a global pool of doctors and nurses. That comes through very strongly. So I would imagine there's also an important audience for this book.
Yeah, and I mean, the way I put it is, these days there are so many Nigerian doctors working all over the world. More are coming. At the moment, I'm a member of a Facebook group, Nigerian Doctors in the UK, with over 10,000 members.
Oh my God.
And many of them are recently, in the last 3-4 years, migrated. And so I think as these Nigerian doctors go out into the world, it's useful for the people they work with as peers, for the supervisors, who are the clinical supervisors, to have a sense of where these people have come from and what sort of upbringing they've had, and be able to put that in context.
Absolutely. Other questions, folks? Oh, I see several. Kathy and then Toby.
Thank you. Hi, I'm visiting here with the Life Writing Centre. I was wondering about how you thought about telling your more recent story and your experiences working in the UK, and whether publishers encouraged you to bring the whole story up to the present rather than focus on that time in Nigeria, and if there's any obstacle to doing that.
So when these books, when I started this book, the idea was it would open on the day I got the news that I had passed the second MD exam, which was the most important exam, because it was the exam that decided whether you were going to continue medical school or leave. It was taking third year. And so that's a day I've never forgotten. It's sort of writ large. You enter medical school, my university, and from day one, second MD is hanging over you, until, yeah. And so I thought I would open then, and the closing, I had the scene all in my head. The day I went for my interview at the tennis club the Queen's Tennis Club in Hammersmith, and and the sun was setting, and I was walking out, and I got the phone call saying, "We'd like to offer you the job as consultant in public health medicine in Hammersmith and Fulham." So that would have been the full cycle, from beginning to end. But by the time I got to the end of first year as a doctor, I had 100,000 plus words. So just even the energy to keep going, to get there, it was going to be a very long time, I thought. And I thought I've got something here that is circumscribed in itself, and I'll see what happens. And as people said, if people like this one, then maybe we'll
Another book, yeah.
There'll be room for a sequel.
Yes, yes.
Great. Yes, please, Toby. Thanks, Alex. This gentleman.
And I want to say thank you. I'm seeing so many familiar faces from different parts of my life. Thank you for taking the trouble to come.
Yeah, talking of audiences, I wonder, have you any thoughts about trying to place the book with a Nigerian publisher to get a Nigerian readership?
Yes, it was, I was always incredibly invested in the idea of it being published in Nigeria. And in fact, I am still quite upset that we haven't managed to have a simultaneous release in Nigeria and the UK, because I remember how frustrated I used to be as a young doctor in Nigeria, hearing about this book by a Nigerian that's doing well outside, and it would be nowhere to be seen. We'd be reading about it in Time magazine and whatnot, and it would be months, if not years. So I always said to my agent, and I want this to come out at the same time. Unfortunately, that wasn't possible because we didn't get a Nigerian publisher on time. But just yesterday, they announced, secured an arrangement with a new book publisher called Masobe Books, who are, they've been incredibly fast and efficient, and so they're saying they should have it out in a couple of months. I'm hoping that will be the case, and because I am confident. I know that that's an important audience for this story as well.
There's another question over there.
They'll keep you fit running up and down the stairs.
But I believe there could be influence, the UK influence in the book, that wouldn't have happened if you had stayed in Nigeria up until this time. I had written the same book.
Sure.
So how do you make sure that, I'm not going to police how you write the book, but then how do you make sure that, that there's some sort
that
of
remains pure.
yes. Of the book?
Okay, I think there are lots of levels to answer or to engage with that question on. One of them is, I'm very much of the school of thought that says, there have been various corruptions. Let 1,000 flowers bloom, let 1,000,000 flowers bloom. So let people in the diaspora, let people at home, everyone write your story. How many, in Igbo they say Oleju. How many do we have? We don't even have enough stories. How many non-fiction, how many doctors' memoirs exist to start picking out whether the person is, when you have several, then you can begin to sort of categorize which are from Nigeria, which are from abroad, which are from. The other point is, so like I said, it's good that we've moved to a place where we're having that debate, because there's a whole period where writing from Nigeria almost seems to have stopped being published globally. You had the sort of Chino Achebes and all that, and then there was a lull, and things just went quiet. And my generation thought we'll never be published globally. And so if it started with people in the diaspora, which is not surprising given we are here, the opportunities are here, the space is here as well. I find it difficult to write in Nigeria. I get a lot of ideas and stimulation, it's intense. But I have to come back, and it's when I come back that I can process. Nigeria, I pick up, I cannot write because it's 24/7, glorious technicolor living. You reflect, one way will knock you down. Someone will push you down in Lagos while you're reflecting on it. So, you just experience, and then you kind of need to step back. And so I think, that's another benefit. But I don't accept in any case that there's any such thing as a pure story. Everybody's story is flawed and flavored by their own, whether they're writing it from I'm at home in Nigeria or, I'm abroad. But I do get your point. I obviously, for me, it wasn't so much an issue because what I think is, it is what it is. It is me, 20 plus years, remembering what I can of my, I don't pretend that. And I often say to people, in the title, why I say in 1990s Nigeria, is so that no one says, oh, this means this is how doctors are, or, I don't know, because I'm not in Nigeria now. But it was also to reflect the political turbulence of 1990s Nigeria, but it was also to situate it specifically, because I know how easy it is for people, whenever they read something, and that was partly driven, the essay I talked about, people don't get depressed in Nigeria, in Granta. I remember meeting someone in the literary world, who said to me, oh, isn't it a shame that Nigerians don't go to hospital when they are ill? They prefer going to, traditional healers. And I thought, what are you talking about? And he said, oh, because, in your essay. But that was an essay when I was working in a rural northern Nigerian community. So I said to him, that's where that's the case. It's not, in the urban areas, people will go to hospital like anywhere else. But I suppose that planted a seed in my mind, be careful how you couch things, because people will say this is medical training in Nigeria, this is hospitals in Nigeria. And one of the things that fascinates me, and I also wanted to bring out in this book, is that, people look at healthcare in developing countries or hospitals in developing countries or resource-poor countries like Nigeria and think it's universally the same, universally bad. And even within the badness, if you like, there are grades. So what I experienced in my teaching hospital, when I went to work in a rural hospital, I was astounded, for instance, that there was no blood bank. The first time as a national service doctor, in Gorzo, Kano State, there was a road traffic accident, mass casualty, and, in Lagos Teaching Hospital or in Enugu Teaching Hospital, you say, group bank was not 10 units of blood from the blood bank, because we did have a blood bank. It didn't always have blood or what we wanted, but we had one. In Gorzo, they were waiting for the villagers to come to donate blood. It was a living mobile blood bank. And even within teaching hospitals, I read about this as well. When I trained in one and went to work in my first year in another. So I trained in Enugu in southeastern Nigeria, and I went to Lagos. And in Lagos, as a house officer, he was junior doctor. I was surprised by two things. One was being told I needed to go and be issued with 2 white coats. And I went and got the coats, and I was told, you know, when one got dirty, I could send it to the hospital laundry. And in Enugu, you took care of your white, you know, who's giving you a white coat? What? Then the second was my first outpatient clinic in Lagos. I'm seeing patients, and then about 11, someone knocks on the door. I'm thinking, and this woman in uniform pushes in a trolley with tea and coffee and biscuits, and sets out. And I'm again looking. You know, like, you're lucky if you, you know. So you know, it was something I wanted to make clear, that there's such a heterogeneity of settings that you can't say this is how this is anywhere.
But laying an accent on that heterogeneity is a way of countering the stereotypes that are projected onto the African continent as if it's one country. And
absolutely.
Yes.
And you know, and it's also saying, you know, like, there are some incredibly good doctors and nurses I worked with in Nigeria. There are some incredibly good doctors and nurses I work with here. And you know, good doctors and good nurses turn up everywhere.
is there a final question? Because we should probably
Yes.
move to a close. I would like to end then with that keynote of there are good doctors and nurses everywhere, and let a million flowers bloom, let these stories come out. I wonder if everybody could join with me in thanking Ike Anya very, very much, Ike Anya. And there are books for sale here. Ike is very happy to sign, you can continue the conversation with him one-on-one, I'm sure. He'd be delighted. But please join with me in thanking him very, very much.